Okay, so I get to welcome everyone to our March Albany Pine Bush Science Lecture. I'm Richard Naylor from the Friends of the Pine Bush community, which co-sponsor with commission staff our monthly series. And before today's program, which is the legacy of fire in soil, wanted to just tell you a couple words about next month's program. It's not yet on the website, so don't go there tonight, but soon. Lepidopterist Mark Mello will present following his last year's surveying of nocturnal moths in the preserve. He'll be focusing on these pollinators in our sandy soil ecology. So that sounds pretty interesting. And now for tonight, if you have any questions, just use the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen, and Dylan will ask your questions at the end. And now I get to turn it over to Dylan.
All right. Thank you so much, Richard. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Lee Jung Wang. He is originally from China. He did his undergrad at the Harbin Institute of Technology. He majored in environmental engineering. He also completed his master's in Beijing, looking at soil pollution, toxicology, and contamination from manure. So you're kind of seeing a theme here with the soils. In 2009, Dr. Huang arrived in the US to complete a PhD in geology at Baylor University in Texas. He then went to Georgia Tech to finish a postdoc in atmospheric sciences. And he came to us here in the Capital District in 2019. He started at Albany as an assistant professor. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Looking forward to your lecture, Dr. Wang.
Thank you very much. I don't know what is it, Amanda or Dylan, yeah, but thank you very much for the invitation, and I appreciate this opportunity to share my current research at University at Albany. So today I'm going to talk about fire, and I'm pretty sure that everyone knows fires, and this is our, we interact with fire every day. But talk about fire, we usually think that is a bad thing, right? Although we know fire is very useful in our daily life, but wildfire, and when we talk about it, it seems to be a bad thing, especially nowadays. We have fire over the medias that fire destruct our property, and fire cause air pollution and affect our human health, right? But fire is a natural phenomenon, and it occurs over the Earth's history. So you can see this map from NASA. This map shows the fire occurrences over the world in last summer. So we can see that fire occurs all over the world. And this is our figure showing the occurrence of fire over the Earth's history. So fire accompany the appearance of plants. And the first record of wildfire can date back to hundreds million years ago. So fire is considered to be a main factor regulating atmosphere composition, especially oxygen content and carbon dioxide content. So in summary, fire is a natural phenomenon, and is a driving force that shape our planet. So I'll use the ancient Chinese philosophy. So here to show the importance of fire. So according to ancient Chinese philosophy, there are 5 essential elements that constitute the universe, and fire is one of them. So you can see this diagram showing the relationship between those factors, right? Obviously, we know that fire needs fuel, right? That is from wood, and then fire burns wood and return the residue into soil. and water can suppress fire, right? So all these relationships is very obvious. But so today I'm going to talk about the three essential factors about wood, fire, and soil. So these are a few figures of wildfire happening in different ecosystems. So the first figure on top is a higher severity fire that burns the tree crown. And we have on the bottom left, this is ground fire in a pit that burns peat. And then we have surface fire that burn mostly litters and ground vegetation. So every fire is unique, right? And obviously we can see from the figures, they burn different type of biomass and they have different severities, and their and you can see like their impact on atmosphere or on soil will be different too. So this is a figure I took last December during our prescribed fire at the biopush, and you can so it's a controlled fire, right? It's has low severity, and the bottom are figures of ash that I collect from the prescribed fire. So the left is the original ash I collected, and the right figure here is the ash that after further burning in the lab. So this is completely complete ash without organic. So the left one still contain about 12% of carbon. So you can see a darker color. So that is important because when we talk about burn residue, so we can have charcoals and we can have ash. But here, for me, I talk about ash is a completely inorganic residue without carbon. So remember, fire can shape our planet, right? So how would that happen? So during a fire, obviously we know that fire burns biomass and consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide and other gases, and also produce charcoal and ash return into soil. And then some nutrient element like nitrogen is volatilized. Most of them goes into the atmosphere. And there are different nutrients in the ash, and their form and availability also change after a fire. But although what happened during a fire is significant, but what happens after fire could be more important in terms of the impact on elemental cycle and landscape and ecosystem characteristics. So just look at this figure of giant sequoias that are burned in 2020. So we can see the difference in burn area and unburned area. Right after burning, we treat that and clear of removal of above ground organic matters, and the ecosystem characteristics are very different. So after fire, it may take decades for vegetation to return, and the type of vegetation return may be different from the unburned area. And the soil composition and property after burning may also change compared to unburned area, and that will affect what happened in the soil. And the change of land surface property also enhance erosion, right? After without tree cover and without above ground litters, erosion rate may increase. So that will affect nutrient loss from the ecosystem. So before I go into detail, let's look at some fundamental process that may happen in forest ecosystem by looking at this tree. So this is a tree that this is a picture that I took along the Hudson River. I'm not sure any one of you have noticed this tree. Yeah, so you can clearly see how the root of the tree penetrate into the ground, right? So there are very complex interaction between plant, microbe, and soil that control many soil process. So we have microbial decomposition of litter that decompose organic matter and release carbon dioxide and consume oxygen, but also nutrient released from litter that return back to soil and can be recycled by microbe and plants. And the root absorb the nutrients and water and then deliver to above ground biomass. So we have photosynthesis and transpiration on treetop, right? And then during the fall, we have litter returning back to the soil that replace the nutrient being consumed. So there are extensive exchange of water, energy, and nutrients between above ground and below ground. So think about it. If fire burns vegetation above ground, it will significantly change what's happening below ground. Although fire does not directly burn the deep soil, right? But with the change of above ground, it may significantly affect soil property and soil process. So these are the few questions that I'm trying to answer. So I have to acknowledge that these are very complex questions to answer, and it's impossible to answer it is impossible to talk about all this in one presentation, and it also require multidisciplinary research. So I will only briefly cover research effort that to try to answer this question, use example from my own research and also others. So let's talk about the first question. So what are being produced from fire? Although we know that fire, right, burn and release all kinds of gas, and then we have charcoal or ash, but will the ash and charcoal from different fire be the same? Right, so let's look at some basic combustion reaction. So we know that depends on what fuel we have, and also the burning condition, we can have different products, right? So in our forest, we have different source of fuels for burning. Like for example, like litters or even organic soil that has been transformed for some time, or fresh litter or living biomass. So during the burning, it may be affected by oxygen availability and the fire weather, and that will affect fire temperature and duration. And all these factors will affect the amount and property of ash and charcoal produced. So we'll look at this figure. So this is a study monitoring the temporal change of temperature during an experimental fire. So the thermocouple records a change of temperature on the ground. So the temperature can rise above to 700 and then decrease. So this is only an experimental fire, and with I would say that the fire intensity is relatively low. So for different fire, the temperature profile may be different. So this is a significant factor that regulate ash and charcoal production and property. And we will talk about this later. So talk about the property of fuel, right? So we have different plant species and plant parts like fruit or leaf or stem or bark. And these different plant species or parts have different chemical composition. Talk about carbohydrate only, right? So we have for different plant parts, they have different abundances of cellulose, hemicellulose, lignans, or protein. And but overall, they are rich in oxygen and hydrogen content. And also for fire, right? We know, as I mentioned, every fire is unique, and the intensity, durations, all these are different. So this is a figure showing the progress of fire, like with flame fire and fire front, and then we have a smoldering fire. So this will have different reactions that transform the biomass or litter into ash or charcoal. So first, let's look at ash. So ash is the residual from complete combustion. So depends on the source biomass. So the ash content can be around 1 to 5% of the original biomass, and the composition can differ between plant species and plant parts, and most elements are highly soluble. And look at this figure, you can see, right, the white area are mostly ash, and for the structure wood part, like here, right, mostly are charcoal. And this figure shows the differential volatilization of elements. So we know some element may be volatile at lower temperature, like carbon, nitrogen, mercury, nitrogen, or sulfur. And then for metals, they volatile at higher temperature. And this table shows the chemical elemental composition of ash from different plants and different burning methods. So we can see that calcium, potassium, magnesium are dominant element in ash, and we have some elements that exist at lower concentration. So the composition will affect the property of ash. For example, their pH and the nutrient availability. So one of my project right now is looking at the speciation of sulfur, phosphor, and like calcium and iron, and how would that affect their solubility and mobility. So for charcoal, charcoal is the incomplete combustion residue from it. So this is a figure I took last October under pitch pine area. So this is charcoal after rainwash. So you can only see like the charcoal, but not ash, right? So charcoal is a material with very high carbon content compared to the feedstock biomass. And the charcoal consists of mostly aromatic carbon and is very stable compared to unburned biomass. And it is a highly porous material with strong absorption capacity. So this is a figure showing the carbon structure of raw and pyrite charcoal. So by carbon-13 solid state NMR. So the region here shows mostly carbohydrate, And then after in charcoal, we can see that most of the carbons are aromatic carbon. So for this peak between 100 to 150 ppm. And so this is a schematic showing the transformation of carbon structure at different heating temperature. So as temperature increase, so the charcoal consists of more aromatic structure like this, and the aromatics cluster, the size of aromatic ring cluster increase, and the red red carbon here we call it bridgehead carbon. So we can see as heating temperature increase, there not only aromatic carbon content increase, but also the bridgehead carbon content increase. So the formation process of charcoal is like the process of coal forming process. Like the charcoal is similar to coal, and this is their elemental ratio for a different type of organic matter. So raw biomass has high oxygen to carbon and hydrogen to carbon ratios, right? And during heating, the biomass will be removed with carbon carboxyl group and water molecule will be removed from biomass and reduce the hydrogen to carbon and oxygen to carbon ratio, and form more carbon rich material like coal. And this is a data showing different charcoals from moderate burn severity and one high burn severity. So we can see from high burn severity fire, the charcoal have more aromatic carbon here compared to the moderate severity burn fire. And the charcoal have different stability. So in one of my past study, I used thermal gravimetry analysis. Basically, it's a technique measuring the weight change of a material during a linear heating of linear burning of the material in the presence of oxygen here. So the higher the temperature when the material burns, the more stable is the material. And the blue signal here shows the heat flow. So it's a differential scanning calorimetry measuring the heat released from the burning. So the heat normalized by the amount of mass change is the energy density of the material. So I correlate the thermal degradation with carbon-13 NMR. So relate the chemistry of charcoal to their degradation behavior. So here, the data shows if the charcoal have more bridgehead carbon in it, so the higher energy density is the material. So with the increase of the bridgehead carbon content from, for example, 10% to 90% here, the energy density also increase, and also the temperature when the material burns also increase. So the thermal gravimetry analysis is a method to simulate the stability of the charcoal in soil. So we can imagine that, like, if the charcoal has bigger aromatic carbon ring, then it will be more stable in soil and more resistant to microbial decomposition. So I just want to show you, right? Ash and charcoal from different fire are very different, and their composition and chemical structure are highly heterogeneous. So we had in order to evaluate their effect on soil property, soil composition, and soil property, we need to know what kind of ash or what kind of charcoal are being produced from a fire. So the next question is, what are the impacts of burn residue on soil quality and process? So assuming before fire, right, a forest ecosystem and the process in soil may be quite stable, fire will cause a disturbance of those processes and make a big change. And after the fire, it may take time for each of the process return back to normal or may not back to normal. So the different process may take different time. So we have to look at all this process and also whether they will interact during the revegetation process or system recovery process. So there are many soil process to be looked at. So today I'm just gonna talk about two process. One is soil nutrient chemistry and availability, and another one is soil microbial community and activity. So this is a diagram showing the phosphorus cycling in forest ecosystem. So phosphor is usually a limiting factor in most terrestrial ecosystem, including forests. So for the phosphor in soil, the main external input are from atmosphere deposition, like from rain or dust deposition, and then also from weathering of phosphor in rocks. But these inputs are very small, and the returning of liter 4, so for phosphor in liter, and the returning of liter into soil supplies most of the available phosphor in soil. But in this process, phosphor in liter are mostly organic phosphorus. So the degradation of organic matter and also organic phosphorus rely on microbe. So microbe catalyze the decomposition and release the ochlorophosphate, which is the bioavailable form of phosphor that can be taken up by microbe and plants. So in forest ecosystem, the internal recycling of phosphor is the main phosphor flux. And think about if there's a fire, right? Fire burns liters in the living biomass, it will change the pool of phosphor and also the form of phosphor. So we may need to know what kind of phosphor in the burn residue maybe, and how would that affect phosphor content availability in the soil. So, and we already know that during a fire, so fire burns a liter into ash and charcoal, and this is the change in phosphor molecular structure after a fire. So before a fire in unburned soil organic matter, there are abundant organic phosphor. So after a fire, those organic phosphor disappear and transform into ochlorophosphate, which is only like PO4 without linking to an organic structure. And this phosphor is highly mobile and available for soil, microbe, and plants roots. And this is one experiment we did to compare the availability of phosphor, the release rate of phosphor from ash and charcoal. And you can see that the release rate is very fast. Within an hour, so a lot of phosphor already been released. and become stabilized. But in terms of the difference between different ash, like ash from here, one is from spruce corn, and then grass, and from like peach pine corn and peach pine needle here. So the amount of phosphorus released from the ash are very different, similarly to charcoal. But overall, phosphorus released from ash is the percentage of phosphorus released from ash is higher than charcoal. And because of the increased availability of inorganic phosphate after a fire, the use of organic phosphate in soil decreased. So this can be shown in the phosphatase activity. So phosphatase is an enzyme that hydrolyzes organic phosphor and release phosphate from organic matter. So when soil with high available phosphate or the soil have limited orthophosphate, so microbes will produce this enzyme to extract phosphor from organic matters. So you can see in here activity of phosphatase right after fire in urban area is lower than that in an unburned area. So it takes decades for the activity recover back to normal. So with increased supplies of phosphor from ash and charcoal, soil phosphor content and availability also changed, especially in salt. So this is a study, a summary, a research finding from a lot of study. So the number in the figure here shows the number of studies. So you can see that most of the studies show an increase of phosphor content in different forms, especially like water extractable phosphate is significantly higher compared to unburned. So thank you, Amanda, for the question. So what happens to all the organic phosphate? So does it build up? Yes. So this is an interesting question. So for the phosphate increase available in soil, right? Because after a fire, we burn plants and the plant density also reduced. So there's a balance between phosphor supply and salt phosphor demand. So with the phosphate content in soil may change over time. So this is only showing the result mostly from certain studies. So overall, phosphor content increase, like water extractable one. So with the increase of phosphor content and availability in soil, we can also see that the plants have higher phosphor content, or the phosphor limitation state is relieved, because so you can see that the ratio of carbon, soil carbon to phosphor, nitrogen to phosphor, so the ratio all decrease. Most of the studies show a decrease in those ratios. It means that content of phosphor related to carbon or related to nitrogen increase, and that reflected in liter. So for plants grow after fire, so, because with increased phosphor availability, so the phosphor content in the liter also increased. So like here, liter nitrogen, liter phosphor content overall positively responds to a fire. And this is the different nitrogen to phosphor ratio for different ecosystem in grassland, like here forest. So the ratio respond differently for different ecosystem. So let's move on to nitrogen. So we know nitrogen mostly presence in protein in biomass. So we know that protein are made of amino acids. So amino acids have nitrogen in the peptide, and these are some amino acids. So after a fire, so nitrogen, most of the nitrogen are volatilized into gas. So like in nitric oxide, in the form of nitric oxide or nitrogen containing volatile organic compounds. And then in charcoal, it contains ammonium and nitrate and some cyclic nitrogen. And in ash are mostly nitrate. So this is one study I did to calculate the nitrogen speciation in charcoal. So the red and the blue are charcoal at 450 and 600 Celsius degree. So that carbon speciation are very different from that in low biomass, but mostly, so the concentration of aromatic carbon or aromatic nitrogen or cyclic other cyclic nitrogen increase. So remember, right, ash and charcoal are the material residue returning back to soil. And with the increased abundance of ammonium and nitrate, the soil nitrogen chemistry also changed. So this is a study summarized the change of nitrogen pool and soil nitrogen in burn area. So this the y-axis is the change in fuel nitrogen amount or the nitrogen pool in above ground like fuel. So and the x-axis here, that is fuel consumption amount, and here this is the fuel consumption percentage. So the y-axis shows the percentage of nitrogen removed after burning. So the removal of nitrogen into air increase with fuel consumption percentage. It means the more fuel is burned into ash, then the more nitrogen reduction. So that is very straightforward. And the correlation between the fuel nitrogen amount to fuel consumption amount actually is not linear, right? So that also mentioned because different ecosystems have different fuel for consumption, but doesn't mean that the fire intensity is higher. And this figure shows the change of soil nitrogen amount and soil nitrogen concentration and soil ammonium pool and nitrate pool. So overall, soil nitrogen amount and concentration doesn't change much because nitrogen, the amount of nitrogen returning back to soil is relatively small. But the nitrogen, the soil ammonium and nitrate concentration respond positively to fire. So the concentration of these two pools significantly increased. And this is the change of ammonium pool and the nitrate pool over time. And we know that right after a fire, the system will recover. And this shows the recovery of soil ammonium and nitrate concentration. So you can see that ammonium concentration return quickly back to normal within like 1 or 2 years. And for nitrate, actually there's no consistent trend here. And the returning also depends on soil depth. So here, nitrogen, the impact of fire on soil nitrogen, ammonium and nitrate pool are mostly significant at the topsoil. So when soil goes deeper, the impact are less significant. So in this slide, I show how soil nitrogen and soil phosphor responds to fire. So I will move on to soil microbial community activity. And we know soil microbial community are very complex, and we cannot even with advance of all kinds of molecular techniques, we can hardly characterize all the soil microbe quantitatively and also explain their functions. But we know that different microbial groups have different functional trail, like some, like here, fungi, are responsible for decomposition of hardwood, and bacteria in soil, some may involve in decomposition of organic phosphorus or organic nitrogen or carbon, right? So the composition of soil microbial community depends on many factors, like soil chemical composition, substrate availability and quality, soil pH, moisture content, temperature, and also above ground vegetation. All these factors can be directly or indirectly affected by fire. For example, soil chemical composition, like I just mentioned, with the returning of ash and charcoal and the removal of litters, the carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus going back to soil are different, and then affect the substrate availability to soil microbe. And soil pH may also be affected. We know ash had a relatively high temperature. With the alkalinity increase in soil, it may affect soil pH too. So it's very challenging to relate change in soil microbial community to one of this factor. So here I'll briefly explain one soil process is the microbial decomposition of organic matter. So during microbial decomposition of organic matter, microbe release extracellular enzyme, which catalyze the decomposition of polymeric organic matter into monomers that can be directly used by microbe and tree. So the amount and the type of extracellular enzyme released into soil are important, but how those enzymes behave in soil are also important, because for example, whether those enzymes can interact with like particular organic matter or other substrate, it depends on how this enzyme moves in soil and their activity. So fire can change the microbial community, like here can directly change the microbial community. That affect the type of and amount of enzyme released. But fire produce ash and charcoal, especially charcoal. We know that it has very high absorption property. So the charcoal returning back to soil can change the absorption property of soil and then affect the mobility and activity of enzyme. So one of my projects right now is looking at how the charcoal may affect enzyme mobility in soil and their activity. Compare the activity of enzyme on charcoal to free enzyme or enzyme absorbed on other soil component. But first, let's look at how soil microbial community may respond to fire. So this is a study showing the response of fungi to fire. So these are different type of ectomycorrhizal fungi. Some of them are possibly affected by fire. So it means that their relative abundance increase after fire, but most of them decrease. And this is a study showing the change of organic matter decomposition. So the rate of carbon dioxide emission. So immediately after fire, the rate of organic matter decomposition are significantly reduced compared to an unburned area. So it takes it needs about 20 years to return back to normal. So this also corresponding to the activity of some enzyme. So this is beta glucosidase. So this is an enzyme involved in the degradation of organic matter. So the activity is lower right after a fire, and then it gradually recover back to normal. So I study how enzyme interact with charcoal produced from different fire condition and different biomass. So here, so we characterize the surface charge of charcoal by measuring the zeta potential at different pH. So for zeta potential that is negative, it means that the overall surface charge of the charcoal is negative, and with a positive value, it means that it's positive. So the surface charge depends on pH right here. And this is also the pH dependent surface charge of a urea nitrogen decomposing enzyme. And then this is the absorption of ureas to different type of charcoal. So we can see that as pH increase, the absorption decrease. That correlate with their surface charge, because as pH 4 and low pH, so the enzyme is positively charged, and the charcoal are mostly negatively charged, and then they attract each other, and absorption is high. As pH increase, both of them are negatively charged, and there's repulsion, and the absorption reduced. So we can generally conclude that the absorption is driven by electrostatic interaction, and properties such as pore distribution and surface functional group affect the charcoal's ability to absorb enzyme, because charcoal is a porous material and depends on feedstock and burning condition. The surface area and surface porosity also are different. And we also measure the enzyme activity with or without charcoal absorption. So we use a very unique technique called microcalorimetry to measure the degradation of substrate in real time. And then this can be used to calculate the degradation rate and derive the Michaelis-Menten constant from it. So based on the analysis, we were able to determine the specific activity of enzyme on different charcoal and minerals. So we can see that the enzyme on charcoal have lower activity compared to free enzyme. So free enzyme has a 100% activity. So the enzyme absorbed on different type of charcoal have lower activity, and the activity inhibition depends on the type of charcoal. So when I provide some example of how charcoal and ash returned to soil may affect soil chemistry and soil microbial community and microbial activity. So we know soil is the fundamental media that support vegetation growth, right? So how does above ground vegetation recover from fire? And then whether the change of soil property and soil process play a role in the revegetation process, right? So this, there are many questions still unclear, and there are a lot of research, ongoing research trying to tackle this question. But today I'll just give some result of recent study. So this is a study showing the vegetation trajectory after fire. This study look at the trajectory of the vegetation. So for ecosystem dominant with black spruce. So after fire, the type of vegetation after fire is different. So so these are different regions in like Alaska and Canada, and these are the trajectory of vegetation. So some systems are more resistant to fire. So, for example, black spruce remain they remain the dominant in the burn area, but some region return with different type of plants. So here, this is the type of vegetation in the changed ecosystem. Yeah, so some are replaced with birch, some replaced with jack pine. Yeah, so we may wonder what are the possible causes, right? Whether that is caused by different fire frequency and those plants have different fire resistance, or whether that is caused by changed soil property. So for some ecosystem, if the change of fire on the soil nutrient condition may be different, and that will affect the type of vegetation it can sustain. And then this also a study showing the impact of differential revegetation trajectory. So if for spruce ecosystem and deciduous ecosystem, so with the after fire in our deciduous ecosystem, the impact of soil carbon, so above ground and below ground, so the change is different. So for deciduous ecosystem, more above ground carbon may be accumulated compared to a spruce dominant ecosystem. So consider if a spruce dominant ecosystem is burned and then is replaced with deciduous ecosystem, that will affect the fixation of carbon. And this is very relevant to climate change. For example, if after fire, the ecosystem is reshaped, and that will affect the carbon sink and emission from those ecosystems. But we know that these are the complex results of fire, climate, and also soil. So it's very important to link all these processes together to explain those phenomena. So this is the summary of my presentation today. So remember, fire is an essential factor that's shaping our planet. In the short term, it may only shape the burning ecosystem, but our geological time is an important factor that can change many parts of our planet. So after fire, different soil processes are differentially impacted, and their chance of returning may be different. For example, like nitrogen may return soil nitrogen content or pool may return faster than, for example, carbon mineralization or phosphor cycling process. Yes, so all these processes may be interacting with each other during their ecosystem recovery. So it is important we study all these individual processes quantitatively, and then also link them together and use them to explain some of the phenomena we observe. With that, I would like to thank you some for funding support and my students that contribute to some of the work that I present today. And then I'm happy to take any questions from you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was chock full of so much information. I did see a question from Richard in the chat. He says, if more litter means hotter fires, does this argue for more frequent fires to promote better soil health?
So more frequent fire, yes. So I would say that in the short term, fire increase nitrogen phosphorus content in soil, but the frequency of fire also depends on fuel availability. If we burn more frequently, we will have less fuel later on to supply soil, right?
Yeah. It probably really depends on the system.
Yes.
Everybody feel free to type questions into the chat or Q&A. There's none right now, so I wrote down a few as you were speaking. So when you were talking about soil nitrogen, you showed the graph that showed that soil nitrogen was pretty much back to normal levels after 2 years about.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's like a short picture, right? What would you expect to happen if like with successive years? So like say it was burned every 2 years, would you expect that nitrogen to keep recovering or would you expect to see some long-term decrease?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. And honestly, I'm not an expert in nitrogen. So nitrogen is more dynamic elements, and there are other processes that may also important, like nitrogen fixation by microbe in the soil. And I would say that at the beginning of fire, because fire remove nitrogen into the atmosphere, and at the beginning, nitrogen may become relatively limited. But as time goes by, and it also depends on vegetation and microbe interaction that fix carbon, whether that process will be able to replace nitrogen, right? So, and I would say that fire may have less impact on nitrogen compared to phosphor in terms of the time effect. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I also did not know about the difference between ash and charcoal. So I just want to make sure that I got it right. So ash is indicative of complete combustion and charcoal is incomplete.
Yes. So although in different fields, we call this differently. Some in fire ecology, people may not differentiate these two like exactly. They call ash as the sole product of fire, right? But technically, ash, we assume it we consider it to consist of only like those inorganic elements without carbon.
Okay.
Yeah, so complete burning, and then charcoal are in like burn under oxygen limit condition, and then it consists of mostly it consists a lot of carbon, aromatic carbon, although it also has ash content in it, right? But it is in the form of like black stuff here, like this charcoal, and then the white stuff mostly like has limited carbon content. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Richard kind of actually followed my train of thought. So is ash less useful than for recovery?
In terms of what recovery, yeah, so I would say that actually we have a project right now trying to quantify the relative amount of ash and charcoal content from a different fire, because we have a fire of different severity or with different fuel source, and then we trying to quantify, develop model to estimate how much fire or how much ash is produced and what are their fuel source. For example, like here, charcoal maybe mostly from the hardwood part, like bark or wood debris, right? And then ash may be mostly from litters or grass, right? Okay. So and their source, the feedstock may have different chemical composition that may affect their chemical, like for example, amount of calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus in it. So in terms of like nitrogen, nutrient recovery into soil, right? It might depends on amount of ash or charcoal and the form of those. And I would say ash is more useful in terms of the returning of the new nitrogen or phosphorus into soil.
Oh, okay.
Phosphorus, yeah, because it provides more phosphorus into and more available phosphorus in soil.
Yeah. Okay. And are they always like different? So you've got the white circled. So ash is always, I mean, carbon's black, right? So it makes sense that if all of the carbon is combusted or gone, then it would be white that was left over. So the ash is always white and the charcoal is always going to be black.
Yeah, so that is what we actually study, trying to establish, quantifying the amount of ash and charcoal. Yeah, you are right. So as the color becomes lighter, it means that the carbon content becomes less. Yeah.
And is that generally indicative of a higher temperature?
Yes, that's what people in fire ecology use.
Okay.
To estimate. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to keep going with my questions, people. So this may be a naive question, okay, right? But we buy charcoals for our grills, right? So is charcoal more combustible than unburned material?
In terms, so different material have different flashing point, right? So yeah. I would say unburned biomass has lower flashing point if they are dry and have low moisture content. Yeah, they start to burn at less temperature. But in terms of the heat can be released from the same mass, I would say charcoal can release more heat.
Okay. So kind of my question following that was, does it create a positive feedback loop then? If you don't have complete combustion and have all of this charcoal sitting, does that then encourage a future fire because it's now you've got all that combustible stuff sitting on the ground?
Let me see. Actually, I honestly, I don't know. Yeah, but I have a collaborator. They study how fire frequency may affect the burning of residues. Yeah. So I can share the paper with you. So they study how fire frequency may affect the storage of below ground, like organic carbon layer that include those charcoal. Yeah.
Okay.
Like like pea, right? In peatlands, there may be some a significant portion of pea may be from prior fire. Yeah.
Oh, okay. How do you think that a century of fire suppression in this country has impacted, you know, because you show these those figures of the changes in the community types following burns. They weren't returning to what they were before they burned, but were they returning to what they were before fire suppression? Like, how do you think that a century of fire suppression in this country affected the soil dynamics?
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah, honestly, I have no answer. It may be better to have people in that field to answer it. Yeah, as I said, this is a complex topic that involves multidisciplinary research, and yeah, I have to acknowledge that I'm not an expert in that direction.
Well, you're certainly an expert in this stuff. This is just an aspect of fire that I had not appreciated or considered either. So it's been extremely interesting.
I may be able to learn more later on.
Yeah, so you're continuing your work in the pine bush. So you're going to be looking at some of these things following before and after burns, right?
Yes, but as you can see, what we can learn, what we can actually study are very short term. So those chemical process, but it's very difficult to predict what will happen like in decades. Maybe after a decade, I may not study this anymore. Yeah, but I have collaborator who has been monitoring in the boreal forest for over two decades, and they can trace back the day of fire like over half a century or a century.
Wow.
Yeah, and then that's how they made those conclusions in like vegetation trajectory. Yeah.
Gotcha. Wow. Crazy. It's also a very different system out west, right? Where the fire suppression is now resulting in wildfires that are pretty catastrophic. And
Yeah.
versus on the East Coast, where the fires are not so catastrophic, but the prevention of them has really changed the landscape.
Yes.
It's very different.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like in Northeast here, like wildfire is not I would say another frequent phenomenon here. So, but
right.
in the West, there are more people studying it. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Richard says, thank you very much for all of the information that you shared with us tonight.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about fire.
Well, thank you so much. We'll have to have you back. Tyler says thank you. We'll have to have you back once you see what you've learned about fire in the pine bush and the soil chemistry.
Yes, actually, yeah, we are collecting data on it, and hopefully, like after a year, like we will have data on the pine bush and can talk about what's happening in pine bush.
Yeah, I'm very curious. Yeah, and like you said, there's a lot that depends on it. I mean, we've got a bunch of lupin out there now, and that's a nitrogen fixer. So
yes.
All right. Well, I think I'll let you go for tonight, Dr. Wang. Thank you so much again for a really engaging, wonderful lecture and for helping me understand a little bit more about what's going on underneath the ground with fire.
Yeah, my pleasure and my honor. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for everyone's time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Yeah, see you. I'll talk to you.
Yep.